Melbourne currently sitting 15th on the ladder. Started the season 0-5. Competed in some games, but sort of have fell away late. Their goal kicking continues to be an issue, as well as their sort of entries inside 50. Clayton Oliver, shell of the former player that he once was. Petrarca hasn't really hit the heights. Gawn and Cozzy have sort of dragged this team through to some wins, I feel. They have had a lot of improvement in their young players, particularly guys like Harvey Langford. Trent Rivers, when he's played in the midfield, has looked good. And they've got, Bowie off halfback, who's had a really good season. So they have had improvement. They've had injuries as well to guys like McVee, who I think is a really good player. So I think overall it's been pretty negative, especially with the 0-5 start. But I do feel like there has been improvement in this D side. I would give them probably like a D+.
Yeah, I was thinking D personally. Yeah. Basically, I mean, I think you covered it really well. I don't think we have to go over that too much more. Yeah. They're lucky. I feel like they're lucky that they've been able to hit the draft hard in these last couple of seasons. The fact that they bottomed out so heavily in the last couple of years and underperformed, I feel like that's given them draft capital, and those players they've picked really well. Yeah. But the performance has been pretty horrendous.
Well, I feel like Melbourne have bottomed out, and they still have those star players performing pretty well. So I think they're positioned nicely.
I think if we go back, we talk about expectation though. If we go back to pre-season, most people were talking finals.
Yeah.
And they traded their first, which implies they didn't expect to be in the bottom four at this current point of the year. So I'm going to give them an F, I think.
Wow.
They haven't come back convincingly enough for me to say that this team, which is mature, is doing well.
I'm like, what am I? I'm sort of like, I played into the Druzy D thing, and then I'm like, it's been frigging horrendous.
Like I think there's been improvement.
No, but there hasn't been improvement on field.
Not results.
Their improvement has been still losing to other good teams.
Well, we gave Essendon a C, and
but the expectation. What do you think? How would you compare those two teams?
Yeah, that's fair.
And like on-field fighting between Stephen May, and Max Gawn, that kind of stuff as well. Like it's just been speculation over Jackson Pickett.
Will it really taste smart? Yeah, all right, fair. Yeah. I'll lower that to a D.
Yeah, let's whip through them. We got North Melbourne next.
Dylan, what do you rate North Melbourne this year?
I feel like it's hard. It's hard to judge them because of the last few weeks that have started to. It does look like they've turned a little bit of a corner. I've talked about it a lot with the fact that statistically they're starting to actually go with teams. There's definitely been some development from some of our those midfield type players. I think Paul Curtis in the forward line has gone to another level. Was probably without that 4-week suspension was probably in line for a Coleman medal. No, All Australian. I mean, and he was actually leading the Coleman at one point, which was interesting. But yeah, I think overall, when you trade away your future first pick, you would have expected more wins. They still have an opportunity to do that. I would say a C off the top of my head feels about right.
I wrote down my notes for this in preparation before they beat Carlton today, and I do think that does change a little bit for me. So I said their expectations would be to try and avoid the bottom four. I wasn't one of those people that thought North were going to bounce up. I think they're still too young. But I think that their ability to beat Carlton, notch up their they've got 4.5 wins now last year. So that's already exceeded last year in terms of premiership points. I'd say that's probably trending towards C+, albeit they haven't played captivating footy much this year, but it has happened very recently.
I think it's one of those ones, though, where I don't think you can give them a C+. I think that's being too generous for what they've done up until this point.
Yeah.
But it sort of looks... I feel a bit more confident going into the back half of the year now. So I think you can't... But you couldn't actually give them the points for that yet, if that makes any sense.
I disagree. I think if they've improved on last year with 7 or 8, 9 rounds to go, I think that for me is enough.
Do you feel like the trading of the first pick, though, shows that the expectation was higher?
It shouldn't have been.
Yeah, I think the expectations are
I get what you're saying, though, if we're trying to project what the club was expecting.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it would have been very naive.
I know North fans coming into the season were talked about at least 7 wins.
Yeah.
That was the expectation amongst fans.
I wouldn't have said if they get 7 wins, that's a C though. I would have said that's an A.
Okay. I would have probably been more like B for that, but yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I thought we should have been going for more.
Yeah, right.
I think C is fair. Like, you're just content with sort of what you've seen. Too much inconsistency earlier in the year. Like that Carlton game at Marvel, they beat them at the G today, but that game at Marvel felt like you had to arrive at that, and it was just a really disappointing display. But the last 3 weeks particularly seen a lot of growth through those young guys, particularly Colby McKercher and Finn O'Sullivan. That you're seeing pieces form that are going to be at North Melbourne for a long time, that have come through the draft, or they've unearthed guys like Combin. I just feel like North for the early parts of the year, bit underwhelming, but some good performances in there. So I think C is fair.
Port.
So they sit currently 11th on the ladder, as we are obviously filming this in the middle of a game, and that could influence where they finish. But let's just say, well, they're currently 4 goals down against the Swans, and I would argue that if they lose this, it's just about season over. I would have thought their expectations this year probably would have been to compete for the top 4, considering they're coming off a prelim.
Really?
Yeah, they've just played in a prelim last year.
No,
Dan Houston leaves, and they took their draft pick in Joe Berry. Sorry, that gets me every time. And then traded in mature talent like, was it Atkins?
Lost one of their best players.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think personally that Port Adelaide would have thought, shit, okay, we're probably not going to play finals this year. I think they would have said, let's load up for a top 4 finish, and have fallen massively short so far.
I feel quite the opposite. I thought there was a really obvious slide coming with Port Adelaide, and I feel like there's been an attempt to, with the Houston outgoing, there's been like a rebuild on the run type thing, which has gone into the whole Ken Hinkley situation as well with the coaching handover. Because I don't think you do that if you think you're going to finish in the top part of the ladder. And I feel like that was always on their mind, the Hinkley to Carr thing. And and I think their midfield, their nucleus of their midfield is still young enough where you can sort of rebuild on the run and then kind of make another launch in like 2 to 3 years. That's sort of what I felt they were going for.
I respectfully disagree. I think Houston leaving was certainly not part of a plan. I'm not saying you said that, but I'm saying that was the last thing they wanted. They didn't want him to go. And to trade in 3 established players, albeit probably all younger than Houston, I don't think there's enough of a push towards refreshing the list there through at least youth to suggest to me that they weren't trying to contend this year, personally.
What do you think, Drews?
D-.
I had D- based on the same logic.
Interesting. So I'm probably more in the C category. It's been worse than they would have, definitely underperforming, but I can push to a D+.
Coming off a prelim though.
Yeah, they played a prelim last year. I feel like
top 2.
They were never in that final series. They didn't have a foot in that final series.
Yeah, which is weird because they finished second.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that, but fair enough. Let us know in the comments who you agree with, because we got some polar opposite views there.
Yeah. But like C for me is there's been as many positives as there's been negatives, so it's just like
right.
And then you bring expectation into it as well.
Yeah.
Going off last year and where they're at now, out of finals contention at this point, they're probably going to lose to Sydney here. Maybe they get up, but yeah, far from D-.
It's been pretty abysmal.
They've had some injuries. I'll throw that out there. Probably not enough to excuse.
Yeah, every
the
club
drop
has
off.
injuries though.
But one of them is one of the best players in the comp. There's that. But either way, it doesn't excuse it entirely.
Richmond are an interesting one. Finished when did they finish? Last year. Wooden Spooners.
Spoon.
Currently climbed 1 spot to 17th. I've loved the way Richmond have played this year under Uze. Had no one gave them any chance at winning that game. Round 1 against Carlton, they win that. They beat Gold Coast, who have been a really good side this year. Just the way that they've showed up, they've got a bit of an identity. Lots of young players, obviously, but I feel like their senior players, guys like Vlosten, Broad, McIntosh has had a decent year. Not anything crazy or remarkable, but I think they've found some good young players in Joe Fonte. Seth Campbell's been a good player. I'd probably give the Tigers, even though they sit pretty low on the ladder, I'll probably give them a B because
Joe Fonte.
Jonty Fall, sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm like, GWS guy.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Jonty mix up. I've liked what direction Richmond has taken this year, and I know Richmond fans have as well. They leave games, even that North Melbourne game, that was a close game at the G. There was a lot to like about it. So I'd give the Tigers a
Couldn't
B.
agree more. I think like as far as they've probably only had 1 to 2 games where the fans have been actually disappointed in the performance, and I think that was expected from a young team. Awesome draft, and the back line's held up, as you said, really well. So for me, it's sort of like B plus A areas on expectation.
I wouldn't give them an A. I feel like they've lost too many games to have an A.
And I suppose if you wanted to really exceed the expectation and win 5-6 games, that would be an A, right? Yeah.
I'm going to go harsher than you boys slightly. I went C+. It's hard to forecast exactly what the expectations were. I think all of us collectively underrated Richmond when they had their players back. There was some naivety in myself included. I have no idea what internally Adam Uze and the playing group and the club thought was going to happen after an injury-decimated season. But I think that to sit 17th, they're clearly better than West Coast, or at least West Coast isn't too far off, but they've played competitive. I don't disagree with any of the positives that you mentioned there, but nonetheless, still sit 17th. I think they're probably going better than expected, so that's why I'm erring on C+. There hasn't been too many performances of really uncompetitiveness. I think it's going well. However, they've got a lot more senior players contributing to that and then, say, a North Melbourne or a West Coast. And that, for me, just takes the gloss off it a little bit in terms of a rebuilding year. I'm going to say C+. I'll give them credit. They're in a good spot, but for me, it's not a B.
You feel like most of the upside has been the senior players pulling them up?
Maybe that's probably a stretch. I mean, Lawler's had a fantastic season. I think a lot of their first-round draft picks at the moment aren't really contributing massively to... I think the senior players that they have in their team are still pretty damn good. You look at the back six, for instance, Taranto's having a great season, Hopper's having a great season by their own standards.
You know where I'd slightly disagree? That the players that have pulled them up more are not the ones that came out of the draft, but they're like Seth Campbell and Sam Banks.
True.
And these guys that you didn't really know
Tom
which
Brown.
way they were going to go.
Steely Green. That's true.
And
that's true.
they've sort of lifted them up, which probably for me feels a bit more positive than say if it was just those Taranto Hopper types.
I agree. Let me clarify my point. I suppose I think the spread of the age and the contributors there, it makes more sense to me why Richmond are playing well. We do not have that at our clubs.
I think as well, one of the things with their senior players, a lot of them are in the back line, which massively helps. Makes them very more assured. And the forward half is where all of the young players are situated.
Yeah. And the midfielders, I mean, Taranto and Hopper, they're not all Australian calibre, in my opinion, but they are good quality big bodies that, again, those other rebuilding sides don't
give
have.
You a foothold.
Yeah.
Let's quickly get through St Kilda. Sitting 14th, they sort of expected to make finals this year. I feel like when people say pre-season that St Kilda aren't going to make finals, I think their fans are pretty quick to get butthurt about that.
That big name recruit, Jack McRae in the midfield.
Yeah, well, we had a good start to the year, but they've now lost 7 out of their last 9. They're always going to get a plucky win here or there. They beat the D's, they beat Freo, so a couple good wins here or there. But yeah, I don't know. They've had players that have had great seasons. Jack Sinclair, Nasiah Wanganeen, Miller, Cal Wilkie and Jack Higgins all in the All-Australian conversation. But I feel like they just play too many older players. I want to see them put some new life into this team. And I know they are doing that, playing Trevelyan. I think the Flying Viking Taru's making his debut this week. Yep. But I just want to see them... They are rebuilding. They have said that. But I feel like at times they've probably played experienced players when I would prefer them to just go, we're rebuilding, let's rebuild.
All of the players, Drewsy, that you just said have been good for them are all players that you just expect to be good. There's not really anyone. I feel like the player that had to have a good year this year, it was Philippou.
Yeah.
And it just hasn't happened through injury. So they have a massive hole in the center of the ground. And I just think, I feel this year's been a bit of a disaster.
I wouldn't quite say disaster. I would say underwhelming given the expectations of the wider AFL community. Maybe for St Kilda fans, it's a disaster. I'm going to give them a D.
When I say disaster, I don't mean the actual position and the wins and losses. I more mean just how it's transpired, not being able to play as many young players as they want, and the growth hasn't really been there. So they're not any closer than they were. They'll go into next season, I feel, no closer than they were a year ago, and that's the disaster.
Yeah, my thoughts are that trying to get reading between the lines a little bit with St Kilda, I believe they made a strategy and talked about it openly that they were going to attack 4 drafts really hard in a row, and they've done that, and I've liked who they've picked up. I think I said in a video last couple of years, St Kilda need to decide whether it's about the group that's in their prime now or the next group. And that's including like Philippou, Machito, Owens, Travalia, Darcy Wilson, sorry, not Darcy Tucker, etc. Philippou. Now that I think that they've aligned themselves with, no, this is the group that's going to take us forward, I think you then skew your expectations into the future. Therefore, I'm going to go a little bit easier on them than, say, some of these more mature types. However, they have lost 7 of their last 9, and I agree. I don't know if they're not closer to getting there. I think experience in any shape or form kind of is something, but they certainly haven't improved. I think it's more of the same. There's been some bad losses. I'm going to give them a D. I think they're capable of more, to be honest. But long term, I like their talent.
Move on to Sydney as we come into the final 3 teams of this video. Grand final last year, I think most people would have expected Sydney to play finals again, but they've been super underwhelming, ravaged by injuries. Dean Cox, I'm not sold on. And yeah, their depth has been exposed a little bit. I would give the Swans, close to it, probably D. Yeah, F.
It's FD for me.
Yeah.
I mean, like there's been a lot out of their control. I totally agree, but at the same time, like we're judging them on the season, aren't we?
Yeah.
Which couldn't have gone much worse.
Yeah, no, it's been a disaster.
To each their own about how you want to grade them. I saved them from an F because of their injuries, to be honest. I think the players they've lost are too important and they've been out for too long that I can't possibly give them an F. But they can't be happy with where they're at the moment, to be honest. I don't think they're a finals contender at this point in the season.
13th on the ladder after a grand final, I think that's got to be an F. Even though the injury, I don't even take, Gordon's been out, Papley's missed footy, etc. But
who's the, I guess in a year like this, you'd want to see some growth in who's got better?
Riley Bice. I mean, he's a recruit, but we've seen some exposure in guys like Caden Cleary, Corey Warner. I don't know.
Wicks has been all right.
Yeah. I don't know how long-term some of these, players will be, but there's probably some silver linings. And when they get their players back, good preseason. I don't think Sydney are ruined by any stretch.
Yeah, I'd probably give them an F. F+.
I'll go with D. You've talked me around, Jesse. Yeah. What about the West Coast Eagles?
I think everything's going to plan.
I'll let you take this one, Jesse. How do you think their season up until this point has been?
My personal expectations, which probably aligned with the club if I had to guess, was that this was going to be another tough year for us. I predicted us to finish higher than Richmond, albeit, but I also underrated Richmond there, and lower than North Melbourne, and that's exactly where we sit. We have seen a brand evolve. We have seen us be more competitive, albeit the outcomes haven't been much better. I think we've still improved from, some of our worst footy of previous years. Even against Carlton, there was a horrific quarter and a half, and then it got better. So there is some growth, but at the same time, we do sit 1 win from 14 games and on track to be, as bad as any team that's come before us, really. I don't really think that's fair to say. I don't think this current evolution of West Coast, given how overexposed it is, like top 5 players all missing, that's on us because we don't have the list, admittedly. But I think there has been enough growth and improvement there for me to save them from an F. I think it's too harsh, but at the same time, 1 win gets you a D.
I think you're 100%. You're spot on. I think if anything, I'd be going slightly higher, and that's nothing to do with wins and losses.
Yeah,
it again comes back to that. I guess the Essendon conversation we had earlier in the new coach. So exposure for him, and some sort of a learning there. You've gone. Elijah Hewitt is starting to look like an A-grade midfielder, albeit it's not there completely.
Sure.
Harley Reid, little bit of regression, but then you've been able to blood some of this youth. Bo Allen's probably had a couple of games now. Tom Gross has looked good when he's come in. The mid-season draftee and Tom McCarthy was awesome on debut as well. So
Dewar got the rising star this week.
Yes, Dewar actually. He's been a shining light as well. So you've had that, and then you go into a draft with the potential of taking probably 3 top 10 picks if you can get your hands on one of those academy teams like the Gold Coast or Sydney's pick as well. So you could have a massive off season as well. So I feel like it's been, as far as wins and losses and on some level performance has been pretty terrible. You've made something out of the season.
Yeah.
In totality.
I would agree with that. What are your thoughts, Truce?
I think there has been improvement. It's hard to grade West Coast given where they were coming into the year. But yeah, I've really liked watching Elijah Hewitt, Brady Hoff, probably those two particularly developed this year. I feel like Harley's stagnated a little bit. Again, one of those sort of mid-forward players that'll take time to develop. But I feel like you have competed well throughout games and then just fallen away. Like the Brisbane loss, the Geelong loss were Like you saw signs there, but to only have one win at this point of the year, I think is pretty disappointing. I'd probably give him a D. Yeah, it's a flat D.
I don't want this to derail, but just on Harley, I don't think his body's right, but I think he's actually dealing with a lot more responsibility than people realise. Like there's no Yo, and Kelly's fallen off a cliff. No midfielder has spent more time at the centre bounce than Harley Reid this year. And I think he's doing the tough stuff to a solid level. I wouldn't say he has improved, but there's a different element to his game that is getting missed a little bit.
I wouldn't say he's regressed. I would say,
plateaued.
Yeah, let's go with plateaued.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
And we'll finish off with the Western Bulldogs, who at times have played the sexiest football in the competition, but yeah, just sort of sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit.
Am I reading this right as a C- on this page here?
I wrote it
as a rough one.
Have
I feel
you
like
gone as
that's
a C-?
really rough
Jesse?
on the Dogs.
Is that a pun? Because that's hilarious.
Rough like the family dog. Family bulldog.
Didn't even think about that. So going into the season, I tipped them as a possible smoky as a top 4, and I got laughed at.
Yeah, I laughed you out of town.
I was abused on the internet after that. So I feel like it's tough when they're sitting in 9th. Pretty much, even with those, on par with those teams like Hawthorn that we talked about. I feel like a C- feels tough here. I was thinking more like B plus A for the Dogs.
Well, they sit outside of the top 8. So
isn't that a contradiction? Because you thought they would be better than they
It is
are?
a contradiction, and I knew you might say that.
I was just confused, to be honest.
But I feel like a lot of that was on the fact of thinking these players would improve a lot. And I feel like they all have improved. Like Darcy has been a nightmare for defenders.
Yeah.
Ed Richards has been the best midfielder in the competition. Joel Frazier's gone to another level.
Sam Davidson's
come in and played this wing role, and they've even got a little bit of exposure to like Josh Dolan and Cooper Hines, who they drafted in 2024 as well. O'Donnell in the back line looks like a serious player. Rory Lobb's playing career best form. I do agree with you. The wins and loss column could look a little bit better, but
their best has looked as good as anyone's.
Yeah. They've had some pretty unlucky losses. I feel like B here is the lowest it could possibly be.
Yeah,
I'm going into bat for the Dogs here.
No, I like the Dogs, and I am they're kind of like my second team this year, given we are not going to mix things up. I like them and I rate them, and I don't disagree with anything you said. However, I haven't claimed enough of a scalp yet. I feel like they failed some tests against Hawthorn. They got close against Geelong. Did they get out to a big lead against Brisbane and lose it?
Yeah, they were like over 5 goals up in that game.
So for me, they just remain a team that is so good on their day, but they're just beating the teams that they're probably expected to beat. And until they claim that scalp, I don't think internally the Bulldogs, who often have been competitive without making the top 4, I think they're aiming for the top 4. I think it won't faze them if they're 6th. They'll just worry about how they play in finals. But I would love to have seen them beat a genuine contender. To this point, they haven't done it, and they're not in the 8 as it currently stands.
Where do you have them, Drews?
I would probably say B is fair for the Bulldogs, just given that they've shown the football that they can play will stack up in finals when they make it. They've never really been a great home and away team for, from March to August or whatever. So I would say there's been a lot of positives in this Dogs side. Don't really know where it goes wrong for them when they lose.
I know.
It's weird. I expect them to win every week with the way that they play.
I do think that's a bit of an historical thing with the Dogs in that, like under Bevo, like they've always struggled with momentum.
Yeah.
And it's like they have periods of games where you think they're in complete control, like the Lions game, where any team should have really been able to. I know Brisbane